Welcome to the 2014 CEB candidate interviews for First Essex State Rep race. And today I'm sitting here with candidate Ed Cameron. Welcome, Ed.
Hi, Sheila. Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Nice
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Without any further ado, let's get started.
Great.
Okay. What do you see as the reason or reasons for lower local aid? And local aid covers Chapter 70s, which is schools, Chapter 90, which are roads, and unrestricted local aid. What exactly are you going to do to change that?
Great question, and it's one I hear about a lot as I'm knocking on doors, particularly educational funding from the state. The reason local aid, which includes, as you said, education and transportation, but also general local aid, it's been reduced from 2002, so we're about 12 years past the peak of it. It started to rise a little bit in the last couple of years. The legislature has made some efforts to bring it back. Really, a couple of things have caused that. Certainly the economic recession from 2007 till more recently, as we've started to come out of that, state revenues have increased and we've been able to add some local aid back in. But it's also really been that the state has been spending a lot of money on health care. Healthcare accounts for almost 50% of the state budget. That's an area where I think we need to do more. So to increase the revenue for the amount going for local aid is to reduce the costs on the healthcare side. So I think that it would entail more cost controls, more working with hospitals, insurers, other providers to try to lower the costs of what government is currently paying for healthcare. And that way we can get local aid, including education, back to levels that we had in 2002.
How do you plan on addressing the Chapter 70 school funding issue in the district, including the unfunded mandates?
Yeah, it is absolutely the number one question that I've been asked as I've been knocking on doors. Amesbury had a particularly difficult budget season in the summer as they were working on their municipal budget. In Newburyport, as we know, we lost a number of positions back in 2006. And Salisbury, with its Triton School, the regional school there, similarly has had issues. There have been some groups meeting in our area that are trying to connect to other statewide groups and stakeholders. We need to be connecting with the Mass Teachers Association, which is the union that represents teachers, but also the Mass Council or Association of School Committees, the Mass Association of School Superintendents, and work with the next administration and work with legislative leaders to try to, one, change the funding formula that will make it more equitable for communities like Newburyport, Amesbury, and Salisbury. We're going to need to add more raw dollars into that formula so we can get higher amounts. And at the same time, we need to rein in special education costs. We need to do that in a way that's going to maintain and improve the services for families with kids that have special needs. But that has really been a real budget buster for smaller communities like ours, where if you have a couple of kids that need out-of-district placements, that can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We want those kids to get the education services they need. It'd be great if we can do a better job in district, save some money, allow them to stay in their their own community, and I think that's the way we approach it. So I think it's really working with the next legislative session to try to get some common ground on that, and I think we're getting there. It's when I talk to other people who are running for office statewide, it's definitely something that we're at a point where there's interest in that, so I think we can accomplish something and make it better for our local communities.
How do you influence the process so that Chapter 90 fundings, the roads,
Yes.
gets to communities in a timely manner so that the funds can be used during construction season?
Right. Chapter 90, as you've said, is the transportation funding that comes from the state. Some of that is federal money that's passed through, but a lot of it is what we get from the gas tax and other funding mechanisms that go into that big transportation pot. It's been funded at $200 million for the last couple of years, and I know the Deval-Patrick administration and legislators are interested to get that to $300 million. There's been talk about having that on a 5-year plan so each community knows how much they're going to get. In Newburyport, I know because I'm on the Newburyport City Council, our road construction the last couple of years and sidewalk construction has started very late in the season. Right now there's a lot going on and we're in October and that needs to wrap up before, sometime before November. So I think it's just getting it on a more predictable funding pattern. I am one who thinks we need revenues from the gas tax, and that's going to provide more stable funding. Right now, most cities and towns don't spend any of their own locally derived taxes on roads and sidewalks. And the only way we're going to be able to afford improvements is to get more reliable state funding. So it's something I definitely want to emphasize.
What issues do you see crossing the aisle to accomplish?
One issue that I think there's a lot of interest in, both from Democrats, and I am running as a Democrat, and Republicans, is around the issue of homelessness. And that's something that I've worked on for 27 years. I worked at the Pine Street Inn a long time ago, shortly after college, working with homeless men. And right now the state is spending hundreds of $millions for homeless families and homeless individuals. Each night there are about 4,000 families that are either living in shelter or at hotels across the Commonwealth because the shelter space is so full. And we're spending all this money, and the outcomes, quite frankly, aren't really where they ought to be. And I know there's a lot of interest from communities that host these hotels because the local school districts need to educate those kids and also provide transportation services. So if there's a homeless family from Lowell and they get placed in a hotel in Tewksbury, the Tewksbury School District is going to need to pay to transport them back to Lowell, and schools just don't. That's certainly an unfunded mandate. So I think it's working across the aisle to try to find ways that we can help families before they become homeless, help them stay in their own community, help the kids stay stable, and I think we'd be a lot better, have better outcomes for them and save the state money. And I know there's interest from legislators across the spectrum on that, and that'd be something I'd be looking to work on.
Do you support the repeal of the automatic gas tax increases? Why or why not?
I'm in favor of keeping the indexing as it is. If we vote yes on that particular question and the indexing goes away, I think we're still left with the conversation about how do we fund roads and bridges, streets and sidewalks, and our bus and train infrastructure. I know the concern has been raised about indexing. And I understand that. I certainly would not be afraid to take a vote, depending on what the current budget situation is, to increase the gas tax. We're in the middle of the pack in terms of New England gas tax. It's very similar to what New Hampshire's is. New Hampshire raised its gas tax up 4 cents. Last year, we raised ours by 3 cents to 24 cents a gallon. And I know that that definitely impacts people's wallets. I personally commute a long way to Lowell every day and back, and I put on about 25,000 miles a year, so I understand that concern. But at the same time, our streets and sidewalks are in abysmal condition. If we could maintain our streets, sidewalks, and bridges, we wouldn't be replacing the Whittier Bridge across the Merrimack River after 50 years. If we had better maintained that, I think that would have had a longer lifespan. So I think we need to find those transportation resources. Indexing is done in other areas in terms of cost of living adjustments for Social Security and other types of benefits. So I don't have such an issue with indexing. But again, I understand that that is an issue for some people. So we'll see how it goes. But personally, I'll vote to keep it as it is. So I'd be voting no on that question.
How would you, as our state rep, handle issues that have joint jurisdiction, such as the Salisbury Beach Improvement Project or the landfill here in Newburyport?
The landfill, yeah. The landfill has just been an ongoing saga. When I first ran for city council in 2007, that had, was an issue that had been going on for at least 4 years, and many years before. The city signed an agreement in 2003 that, quite frankly, in hindsight, was not in our best interest. So I think it's continuing to work with the next Attorney General, because we'll have a new one, with the next Governor, because we'll have a new one, with the Department of Environmental Protection, which has been underfunded itself. They've had a lot of staff cutbacks over the last 15 years. Their enforcement hasn't been where it needs to be. I think the Attorney General's office, the enforcement hasn't been where it needs to be. We need to work very closely with those partners because they've got a lot more power and influence than we do. We're faced with a pretty unscrupulous landfill operator, and I know it's back in court right now, but that's something I want to really continue to do the work that Mike Costello's done and also that Katie Ives is doing right now. In terms of issues around Salisbury and beach development, these local communities need partnerships with the state, so it's being able to contact the right state agencies, whether it's Salisbury Beach revitalization, whether in Amesbury it's the Lower Mill Yard, and trying to get the state to help with the infrastructure. That's what the state does best, is to try to fill in some of those very foundational aspects that cost a lot of money, that there's no way localities can fund that. But with some development money from the state and some, the right incentives, you can really create very viable economic projects. So Mike Costello's done a great job. One thing I've learned in the door knocking, especially in Salisbury, people really appreciate his efforts to try to improve the beach area, and that's something that I want to continue.
How do you plan on ensuring that you bring transparency to Massachusetts government?
Great question. And sometimes, we think Massachusetts is, a supposedly liberal state and progressive state, and that we would have an open and transparent system. There are definitely aspects to the way that the state legislature works that I would like to see reformed. Again, I think there have been a lot of great accomplishments by the legislature in the last couple of years, certainly around health care, improving services for folks who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, in various reforms. But I think there should be roll call votes. I think committee meetings should be open to the public and to the media. I think agendas should be printed in advance. One of the strange things about Massachusetts is at the municipal level, if we're going to have a meeting of the Planning and Development Committee of the City Council, I need to post that 48 hours in advance. I'm the chair of that committee. I need to put the agenda items on there. It needs to be open to the public. And at the state level, a lot of things are happening behind closed doors. And I'm not saying conversations shouldn't happen between legislators, but I think when committees have meetings or hearings, that should always be open to the public with advance notice. And I think the state's legislative website is pretty good. You can track bills, and there's a fair amount of transparency, but I think every roll call vote should be easy to find there, and right now it's not, and that'd be something I want to help on.
The proliferation of drugs in our area and throughout the Commonwealth has become a huge issue along with drug overdosing. What do you think is the root cause or causes of the problem, and what specific steps do you propose to address this growing problem?
That's a tough question. The root causes, drug addiction has been with us for many years, different forms, different substances people might be using at any given time depending on what is common. We have a system that it has essentially a war on drugs, that it takes a kind of a public safety and criminal justice approach to it. I think we need more of a shift to more of a medical model. Folks don't get addicted to drugs on purpose. I don't think any, a 16-year-old kid who is sniffing heroin or trying angel dust or some other drug is not, thinking that 5 years from now, I'm going to be, injecting heroin. So I think we need to do a lot better job in terms of the medical model of educating and certainly prevention from an early age and making kids aware of the dangers of these substances. And treatment, when people want treatment, making it much easier. I know, again, I've worked in the homeless field for a number of years. 20 years ago, if somebody, addicted at that point, it might have been crack, which was much more prevalent, or alcohol, which is alcohol is the #1 major drug that causes problems in our society. You could get into a public detox, so these were run by the state, and it was free. You did not have to have health insurance. Right now, there's a lot of barriers to getting into treatment facilities, and you don't get to stay as long. I think we should lengthen the amount of treatment. For certain drugs, people are going to need inpatient, residential types of treatment. Outpatient is cheaper, but it might not necessarily be as effective. So I think it's really that education at an early age, and then treatment and making treatment on demand. I learned working at Pine Street that for alcohol, we would send guys 20, 25 times to detox, and then time 26 is when it clicked, and they would get into a halfway house or some sort of a transitional program and start to do the things where they could live a life substance-free. And that's even harder nowadays with heroin being so cheap and these other drugs that are just constantly available to people, that we need to have longer times where people can get the treatment that they need.
Do you support the House-approved legislation to provide in-state tuition to illegal immigrants or the undocumented? Why or why not?
I do, and that's been an issue at the federal level. There's been a lot of discussion about that in California. There's different states have had different approaches to this. And I do think it makes sense to offer in-state tuition. And again, this is not free. It's for undocumented, teenagers, kids that want to go to a state school. They've been here, brought here by their parents, usually. And these are folks that want to contribute to our society. I think them putting their own money into the system, it's been documented by the Mass Taxpayers Foundation that does actually add revenue to our higher education system. I think it's in this country we want to aim people in the right direction, and people that want to further their education and be contributing taxpayers. I think that makes a lot of sense, so I would be supportive of that.
Do you or do you not support showing ID to vote? Why or why not?
Right now, I know that's been an issue in a lot of southern states in terms of voting rights and connecting to civil rights and denying people the franchise of voting. I think in Massachusetts right now, formally you're not required to show an ID just for, if you've been an active voter and you show up, you're not going to get asked for an ID. But I know because people in Newburyport have asked me as a counselor, they've said, when I went, I hadn't voted in a couple of years. They asked me for an ID. How can they ask me for an ID? If you're on the inactive rolls, you can get asked for an ID. So I don't think a formal program of everyone having to show a driver's license or an official ID is necessary. The question I have is, what problem are we trying to solve? I think voter fraud, in terms of Ed Cameron, voting in Newburyport and then going over to Amesbury and voting and going to Salisbury and voting. I don't think that's going to happen.
You've got good incentive right now.
I got very good incentive, but I'm still not going to do it, Sheila. It's not really much of a documented problem. People are going to face a very, very stiff penalty if they try to do that. I think where we should be concerned about voting and our influence on the political system is the money that's in politics. There have been some Supreme Court decisions that have really opened up the floodgates for corporate money and very wealthy people who can really put a lot of money into political advertising. And I think that would be the way to make sure that each of us has one person, one vote, and we can all influence the system equally. Right now, our system of campaign finance is really rigged in favor of corporations and very moneyed interests. And normal people like you and me, I think we are a little bit disenfranchised when somebody else can really inject themselves into our political system and really alter outcomes.
In the aftermath of the verdict of July 25th with the commissioner of the probation department, who was convicted of providing illegal gratuities to members of the legislature, in your opinion, what should the legislature do to ensure that no other agency has a rigged hiring system?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And people have asked me as I've been knocking on doors about honesty and integrity in government, and I actually, I'm aware that the legislature has taken some steps in terms of not providing references or direct referrals for certain jobs in the administration. I think part of the issue with the probation department and the trial court is they don't really belong under the governor, so they're kind of out there on their own, and that certainly, I think, led to some of the problems there. And I want to see us be as open as possible in hiring. I think we should be very clear that legislators shouldn't have that kind of influence. I certainly will not be referring people for jobs, which may make my life easier if I am elected. And it really, people need to get the jobs on the merits. Citizens and taxpayers need to know that their dollars aren't being screwed around with. And they need to know that the best people are being hired for state jobs, whatever the job is, if it's in health and human services or in housing or in the probation department or the court system. We need to know that we've got the best people we can get. I'd be interested in finding out what other states are doing just to try to have that separation and let the departments and the hiring managers be the ones that make that choice. But make sure it's very well documented. I know the main criminal act was falsifying some of the hiring records and faking interviews and and things like that. And we need to make sure that we have a very well-documented hiring process that is subject to review, whether that's from the, the legislature, the governor's office, or perhaps the state auditor or the inspector general. I think having some third-party oversight to those hiring processes would be good, would put every state official on notice that they need to have a very straight and upboard hiring process so that we don't have these kind of situations.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
As do the voters appreciate it.
Thank you, and would appreciate your consideration, and hope to meet many of you in the few weeks we have left, and see you all at the polls on November 4th.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheila.